failure is by far her most dedicated and impactful teacher. And I actually think all of us are going to be able to relate a lot to this if we let ourselves. So Melanie, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. So if you'll indulge me, I'm very much into PowerPoint. Thank you, Tisha. Presentation coach, Tisha. So I'm going to just share my screen and have some visuals just to support as we go through. Yeah, so just bear with me while I share my screen. Double check, can everybody see? I'm going to minimize here so it's not going to be too much of a distraction. Everybody seeing okay?
Yep.
Great, okay, because I can't see you now, or me. So you have to pipe up if things are going awry. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity. It's the first time I've ever talked about this, and I was speaking actually at a meeting I was on with Tisha as part of her group this morning about how excited I am about this, because it's one of the first times I've had a chance to talk about things that have been passions in different areas of my life and relating those things together. And hopefully you'll see what I mean a little bit more. So essentially, again, we're going to be exploring failure just so you have an idea of what's up. I will be given, what the ideas around failure, our thoughts and feelings around it, and then failing to achieve. So really, and I do make that positive, and I was thinking of you, Erin, as I was trying to punctuate this. And I was not entirely sure. So the pause is there, you're failing to achieve. And we'll talk a bit more about the necessity of that. I'll give you a couple examples. It's hard to narrow it down. One from personal and one from career path failures. And then I'm going to just sum up the learns and how failure has helped me and what I've learned about failure in general. And then we'll open it up to the exciting chats, and hopefully you guys can share some of your experiences as well. Okay, so without further ado, it's not allowing me to, okay, great. What is failure? So if I say the word failure and I ask you for a moment, and don't worry about sitting with it for too long, because I know what feelings this can bring up. If you think of something that you failed at, maybe even something big, if you can go there for a minute, I imagine you're going to get certain feelings that come up. Okay? They don't feel very good, unfortunately. But one thing that really interested me, my background is in education, and I've done a lot of research on how people learn best. And the way we learn best as humans is through trial and error. And guess what that involves? A whole heck of a lot of failure. It involves more failure than achievement, and it's necessary to get to achievements. And so this is innate in us. We are designed to learn by trial and error, by trying and failing, learning from that, trying and failing again. And if I can just go back to this little kid learning on a skateboard, we see this in very young children. And if you want to go back even further to this, if you go back to babies learning to walk, it's probably like the earliest indicator that I can think of. They fail most of the time. In fact, babies fail most of the time at all the things they're trying to do, but they keep going. So just to the point that this is how we're designed to learn, and they achieve. They walk, they talk, so those are big achievements when you consider how they start out. So when does it start to feel shameful? Because when I asked, if you remember, I asked you if you can just kind of reach back and think of what those feelings are, and sometimes they're hard to name. Brené Brown does some amazing work on shame, and in her research, writes amazing books about it. And essentially, shame is when you actually feel wrong because of something you did. And somewhere along the line in our culture, inadvertently, we unconsciously adopt these ideas that to get something wrong is to be wrong. And we don't want to be wrong. So we've kind of melded making mistakes into being wrong, something fundamentally wrong within us. And that makes us feel ashamed. And there's some research actually that ties into what the impact of that shame is. And I have to be very careful not to go off on other tangents. So I'm going to keep this very focused for this conversation. But there is a lot of research in education about how this fear or this shame prevents us from risk-taking and prevents us from achieving our full potential, and reasons why it happens. And it's documented year on year as children progress through the elementary grades that fear of risk-taking and putting yourself out there increases as they go through. And I'm not blaming schools. I'm just saying it's one of the things that can happen at that, where we get these unconscious messages that getting something wrong means we're wrong. And when we feel wrong, we want to hide. When you feel ashamed, you want to hide that from people. And that's where the unconscious impacts come in, of failure, of fear of failure. So if we're afraid of getting it wrong, we're going to try fewer and fewer things, and we're going to take fewer and fewer risks. And when we do that to protect ourselves. And I'm really excited that my talk came on the backs of the other two talks prior, because they talked a lot about, both ladies talked a lot about, you know, our mindset and how we try to hide away. We want to feel good about ourselves. So it's natural for us, if we feel ashamed of getting something wrong, to not put ourselves out there if we're not confident we're going to get it right. And this can hold us back in a multitude of ways. But the key is, because this is unconscious, one of the things, and especially with shame, is bringing it to light and feeling and recognizing it when it's at play. We can then start to reframe our thoughts around failure. We don't necessarily get rid of the shame, but we recognize that that's not the full picture, and that's just a learned reaction over time, which can be profoundly impactful when we can reframe failure as actually a gift that we can learn from. So I did mention I'm going to go into a couple examples here. So a personal example is a parenthood failure. I have many. It was hard to choose one. So I tried to choose one that was most kind of broad, that we could all maybe relate to in some sort of relationship issue in our lives. So somebody you care about, your input with them is fundamentally important. And I thought parenthood, this particular one, I find amusing because of what I used to think it was before I had kids, and then the experience and how I've learned from it, from the failure. So this was my vision. This was me and my child, happy, bonded, connected. See how happy they are? Remember happy? Remember that. That was my vision. Now, I'd been around children and, you know, recognized that children would cry and whatnot, but I was a teacher and I was the big cousin and I was always there. And for some reason, I was able to very quickly help them process that. So I had this parenting thing in my mind. And then I had the baby who I loved and was bonded with and was there for, but I felt like I failed because I couldn't make the baby cry in the time that I thought the baby should cry. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's something wrong. And I don't know, is it a wet diaper? Are they hungry? How many times do I burp this baby? And then in toddlerhood too, when they started to walk and talk and process frustrations, I would feel like, again, if I hadn't moved them through that sadness or that frustration quickly enough, that I had failed them somehow. And again, through reading some of Brené Brown's works, and I think a couple Oprah things, she's done on Oprah a lot, I found some clarity, and I started to reframe that my failure to speed my children through the process of sadness and unpleasantness was actually a good thing. And I realized through that failure and trying again to help them, instead in the beginning it was like to stop crying because I felt that meant they were better. I started to recognize, you know what? I'm adding my own tension. I'm adding my own emotions to the situation. Reading some parenting books, work from Brené Brown, I thought, you know what? Actually, my role is to be there with them. So this child is sad, but they're, you know, he's in a warm embrace, and the parent's role is not to make the sadness stop. It's to help the child learn skills and reach out for help so that as they grow into their own relationships, that they become resilient, and that there's a way to process sadness. So my initial idea was I must stop the sadness quickly. And my clarity through my failing to do that, again, which I should have, was actually better for my children and me as a parent as well. So that's one example, like for a personal example about how failure has helped teach me very valuable lessons. My second thing I want to touch on around failure is entrepreneurship failures. And I have failures here because they are key to success. And anyone in the startup space will recognize A, some of the mistakes that I was making, and B, some of the learns. But without the mistakes, we wouldn't have come where we were. So as Wendy mentioned, my co-founder and I, he's the technical one, my background's in education, for many years have been trying to leverage technology in a way that empowers people. And we're both very passionate about this. And we had this great idea. And I love this about entrepreneurs, and I love this in us. There's this passion for this great idea. And so essentially, the big idea was to use existing technology to empower people to solve current problems with the technology they're using. For an example, it actually turned out to be quite a winding road. 𝘕𝘓𝘓 was initially, if you look way down in the back there, on the left, top left of the screen, in that wind of the road, we started off as a social network that would protect privacy. The problem we saw was that technology was actually, free technology was being used to exploit people's data. And we thought we'd come up with a solution around that. And we did, on paper. Very detailed writing out, which we didn't really talk to many people about it, but we were very passionate about this idea. And then we started thinking, you know what? Everyone's still on Facebook for as much as they're complaining. So we had a sense that this really wasn't a very viable business concept. The whole idea, rich dad, poor dad, like, can you make a better hamburger than McDonald's? Yeah, that doesn't mean you can go up against McDonald's. So we kind of shifted away from that. So what else can we do to leverage technology to empower people? What's another problem people are struggling with that technology could help with? Work-life balance. You know, calendar apps were crap at the time. This was before Calendly. I do love Calendly. And we had this idea about helping to use technology on a mobile app to give people an accurate idea of how they're spending their time and ideas and tips about how to gain better work-life balance. And I still really love this idea, this great idea. And we spent some time with an app development company. It's the first time we learned about MVP, a minimum viable product. And they talked us through, we went through this whole process. It was $10,000 for a weekend, and it was in New York, which was cool, and it was worth every penny. Because it helped set the stage for us failing at this idea. So bear with me, there's a point to that. We then employed an offshore development company, which my co-founder was able to go visit. And they were very impressed, but at the end of the day, what happened is that they were not able to produce the product that we had put forward. They tried, they just didn't have the resources. But we worked with them back and forth for many months before we came to this realization and understanding. And through that, I learned project management skills. I learned about, you know, you can't just have everything in writing. We were working in different languages and different time zones. So I really learned about wireframing and how to communicate visually. And a lot of the things that I had used as a teacher in my previous career were coming to the fore, and I was learning new skills relevant to the job. But that was a costlier mistake because we had not connected with really the idea of a minimum viable product. You come up to another bend in the road here, and we were going to be a discount service that was going to be profitable for small independent businesses. The problem being that small independent businesses always run the large discount promotions like Groupon at a loss. So we were going to fix that problem with technology. And we started, this is around about the time here, in the road that we connected with 𝘈𝘓𝘓. And 𝘈𝘓𝘓, for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar, is a tech incubator here in Halifax. And we started really learning a lot from them and their programming around the minimum viable product. And we started pitching this idea. We went out and we talked to potential prospective customers. I walked up and down Portland Street, downtown Portland Street here in Dartmouth, and people were excited. Yeah, I like this idea. One of the providers said, I don't really offer that many discounts. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Thank you for that feedback. And then we started pitching the discount idea at pitch competitions. And basically, to sum it up, what we landed on is people were way more excited about just finding more small local businesses, which is what we landed on. It's the bigger problem that small local businesses are almost invisible online. Unless you have a very niche kind of service, it's very, very difficult to get to access small businesses online. And for people wanting to buy local, that's hard. And for people, the small business owners, that's hard. So we thought, okay, let's do that. And then we kept getting asked by a very kindly early advisor, what's the smallest thing you can do? Because we were still thinking mobile app. And then we thought, well, you know what? Let's just make these connections via a website right away. Let's just do that. Let's just try and do some good at a smaller scale right away. And that's what we finally launched with 𝘈𝘠𝘓 and where we are right now in the road. But if you see here, this road is turning again. So do we know exactly what 𝘈𝘠𝘓 is going to look like later on? No, but because I can see the path and how not sticking too tightly with what we thought was the right idea for people has informed and changed what we're going to do. You know, it's likely 𝘈𝘠𝘓 will look a little bit different in the future, but that's going to be informed by customers rather than the original idea that we had at the beginning. So I want to credit Michael Siebel here. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with Y Combinator. They're an accelerator and they have amazing content. So if you're in the entrepreneurship startup space, definitely check them out. This is from a YouTube video called How to Build Your MVP. And when he said this, I stopped in my tracks because I thought, I gotta get this into this presentation because it's so to the point. I learn from failures, but it's just in the context of a startup in the startup space. And he says, hold your problem you're solving tightly. Hold your customer tightly. But hold the solution you're building loosely. And the reason why that resonated is because it's my big learns around failure from the research I've done, from my personal failures, from my professional failures. And I've just adapted copied from him. So if you'll indulge me, I did credit him. So I'm, kudos to him because it was a great concept. To my big learns. So for me, it was holding the big vision of what I'm trying to accomplish tightly. What was my big vision for my children? That they become resilient, happy, fulfilled adults. That's the big vision, right? For all parents, I would say. Hold the people involved in building that vision tightly. So if I can switch to the professional example, what are the buy local customers looking for? What are the problems? What's the feedback on our client side? Like, how are the small independent businesses interacting? Is there something else that we could help them with? And having an ongoing dialogue with them about that. And that's already shaped how we have provided our services since we launched just in December. So it's incredibly valuable, that ongoing, like who are the people that are involved in this vision and how can we work with them? Hold that tightly. But hold the idea of what that achievement will look like very loosely. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know that actually children crying was okay as long as you're with them. I really didn't know that. My idea of that was that they would stop crying right away and then that was success. And I was incorrect. So I had to change that and shape that idea. We started out building a social network way back when. So we held that idea very loosely, but we kept the idea of how can we leverage technology in a way that actually empowers people. And this is where we landed today with 𝘈𝘠𝘓. So yeah, that's kind of my run through. I didn't want to take too much time. I actually have to admit to not having any sense of time because I can't see the clock on my phone and I got carried away. But yeah, I'm really excited, and I hope you feel comfortable enough, and I'm excited to pop in and out of the breakout rooms to have some discussion around failure and learning from that, from your perspectives as well. So
thank you so much, Melanie. That's awesome.